You think you know what it feels like to be lost, but you don't. Not until you step off a train into a world that was never meant for you. The sky was on fire, all copper and purple, as the thunderheads rolled in over the plains. The air was thick. You could taste the iron in the dust, the promise of a storm that wouldn't break. Then the whistle of the westbound train screamed, a lonely sound in a lonely land. It shuddered to a stop at a place that was barely a place. A wooden platform, a crooked telegraph pole. That was it. And a young woman stepped down. Her name was Jessamine McGraw. She held her trunk like a shield, expecting to see someone. A man named Raymond from a town called Willow Creek. The letter in her pocket promised him. But the platform was empty. Just a couple of farm hands sleeping against a post, and an old dog sniffing at the dust. The train groaned and pulled away, leaving her in a cloud of cinders. The dust settled around her boots. The sign above the depot didn't say Willow Creek. It said Dry Creek Junction. She mouthed the words. Wrong place. She'd gotten off at the wrong place. The train was already a spark in the distance, its sound fading, taking any chance of a quick fix with it. She was stranded. A dry wind blew, whipping her hair, and a cold dread settled in her stomach. She went inside the station, a little shack where a clerk shuffled papers without looking up. He gave her a once-over, his eyes lingering on her muddy skirts and tired face. He sniffed, a sound that cut deeper than any insult. She asked about a coach to Willow Creek, her voice shaking just a little. None till morning, he grunted. Might find a room in town, though there ain't many decent places for a lone lady. The way he said lone lady felt like a curse. She went back outside, her knuckles white on the handle of her trunk. The sky was getting darker, lightning flashing in the distance. She told herself she wouldn't cry. But the old feeling was back. The feeling of being an outsider, a ghost at the mercy of strangers. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Steady. Coming from the west. A rider on a big chestnut horse. He was a large man, shoulders broad under a dusty coat, the brim of his hat hiding his face. He dismounted with a quiet grace, his boots hitting the platform with a solid thud. Silence seemed to follow him, to thicken around him. He took off his hat. Dark hair, a face carved by the sun and the wind. And his eyes. They were gray as the storm clouds overhead. They landed on her and stayed there, measuring something she couldn't see. You're not from here, he said. His voice was low, rough. It took her a second to find her own. I was meant for Willow Creek. The words trembled. His eyes flicked to the station sign, then back to her. You got off wrong. Hearing it said out loud made it feel final, irreversible. The clerk said there's no coach, she managed. The man nodded slowly. Dry Creek's no place for a woman alone. He glanced at the flickering lights of the town, at the saloon where rough laughter spilled into the street. Best you find a roof till morning, he said. And where would that be? She asked, her voice small. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his jaw tight, as if deciding whether or not to get involved. Then, without a word, he lifted her trunk like it was nothing, a child's toy, and slung it over his horse. Boarding house on Main, he said. Miss Carroway keeps it. Not kind, but it's dry. He didn't ask. He just acted. He expected her to follow. And a part of her hated it, hated being led. But another part, the scared and stranded part, felt a wave of raw relief. They walked through the dusty streets. People stared. A little girl pointed. Two men on the saloon porch whispered behind their hands. Shame burned her cheeks, but she kept her chin up. She could already feel the story being written about her. The lone woman. The mysterious stranger. What kind of trouble was she bringing to their town? The man didn't seem to notice. He just walked, his silence a shield. But when a gust of wind tried to steal her bonnet, he shifted his body, blocking the dust from her face. A small thing, an unconscious gesture, but it was something. The boarding house was a 3-story block of weathered wood, shutters rattling in the wind. He set her trunk on the steps. "She'll take you in," he said. "I'll see that she does." She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. She just asked, "Your name?" He met her eyes, and his gaze was so steady it sent a shiver down her spine. Colt Brannigan. The name sounded like iron, a name you spoke with either respect or fear. Before she could say it back, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, framed in lamplight, her face pinched with suspicion. Miss Carroway. Her eyes went from Colt to Jessamine, judging her worn dress, her tired face. "Another stray," she clipped. "You'd best come in before the rain. But I won't have trouble under my roof." Colt's shoulders tensed, but he said nothing. He handed the trunk over, his hand brushing the handle one last time before he stepped back into the night. Thunder cracked right over their heads. Jessamine stood on the threshold, caught between the sour-faced woman and the retreating shadow of the giant cowboy. Wrong station, wrong town. But as lightning lit up the sky, she had a terrible feeling. The real danger wasn't being stranded. It was how much she already hated to watch Colt Brannigan walk away. The boarding house smelled of lye soap and old cabbage, a smell that stuck to your clothes and your memory. Miss Prudence Carroway looked Jessamine up and down, her eyes like a shopkeeper's, tallying up her worth and finding it lacking. "I keep no charity here," she said, her voice as stiff as her collar. "You'll pay in coin, or you'll sweep floors. Which is it?" Jessamine's throat went tight. She reached for the small purse hidden in her sleeve. The few coins inside rattled, a pathetic sound. It wouldn't be enough. It was never enough. She opened her mouth to promise she'd work, but the sound of boots on the porch stopped her. Colt Brannigan hadn't left after all. He filled the doorway, his hat in his hand, those storm-gray eyes locked on Miss Carroway. He walked to the counter and laid $2 silver on the wood. The sound was loud in the quiet hall. "She stays," he said. Just 2 words, a command, not a request. Miss Carroway's lips pressed into a line so thin it almost disappeared, but her hand, quick as a snake, snatched the coins. "Money speaks," she muttered. Then her eyes darted back to Jessamine, colder than before. "Still," she added, "the town will whisper." Whisper. Jessamine knew that word. It had followed her from town to town, a shadow she could never outrun. She wanted to shout that she hadn't asked for his help, that she could take care of herself. But Colt was already turning away, melting back into the storm. The sound of his boots on the porch steps faded, but the echo stayed in her chest. Her room was small and cold. The bed sagged. The one window rattled with every gust of wind. She sat on the edge of the mattress, her hands trembling. Gratitude and shame fought a war inside her. He had helped her, but in doing so, he had branded her. She was his charity, his stray. And in a town like Dry Creek, that was a dangerous thing to be. The storm passed overnight, leaving the town looking clean and miserable. Jessamine came downstairs, ready to go to the telegraph office, ready to fix this mistake. But the moment she entered the dining room, she felt them. The eyes. Women stopped talking, their gazes like needles. Men smirked into their coffee mugs. A word drifted across the room, just loud enough for her to hear. Bride. Then another. Lost. Then a short, ugly laugh. She kept her chin high and walked to an empty table in the corner. Miss Carroway slammed a chipped plate in front of her. "Bread. Eggs gone cold," she announced. "Best eat. The town won't feed you on kindness." The door opened, and a sudden hush fell over the room. It was Colt. He didn't look at Jessamine, but his presence was a physical thing. It filled the room, silencing the whispers. He poured a coffee and stood by the door, drinking it like he couldn't be bothered to sit. He caught Miss Carroway's eye and held it, just for a second, but it was enough. The woman turned away, flustered. He hadn't spoken a word, but he had defended her. He had not abandoned her to the whispers. That knowledge was both a comfort and a cage. Later she walked to the telegraph office. The dust swirled around her feet. Men on the saloon porch watched her go, their eyes hungry. "Looking for your husband, sweetheart?" one of them called out. "Or just anyone who'll do?" Their laughter followed her down the street. She didn't flinch. She was used to it. She had always been seen as less than. Too poor. Too alone. But something was different this time. A little spark of defiance. Maybe it was the memory of Colt's quiet strength. At the telegraph office, the clerk took her message with a bored expression. He tapped it out, the keys clicking like tiny hammers. "Might be days 'fore you get a reply," he said, not looking at her. "Maybe never. Don't hold your breath." The words landed like stones in her stomach. Days. Maybe never. She stepped back out into the harsh sunlight, feeling the weight of her mistake crushing her. Then she saw him. Colt. Across the street, loading sacks of grain onto a wagon. His movements were slow, powerful, silent. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. But for a moment his eyes met hers, and it wasn't pity she saw. It was recognition. Like he saw something in her that even she had forgotten was there. That evening, she found her trunk moved to the bottom of the stairs. "Who moved this?" she asked Miss Carroway. The woman sniffed. "Your cowboy," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Seems he's taken it upon himself to watch over you. Folk are already talking." Jessamine's heart leapt into her throat. She looked out the window, and there he was, leaning against the hitching post across the street, not looking at the boarding house, but just there, guarding it, a silent, unmovable protector. She pressed her hand to the cold glass, torn. She hated depending on him, but for the first time in so long she didn't feel completely, utterly alone. Later that night, a sharp knock rattled her door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She opened it a crack. It was Miss Carroway, holding a candle, a strange, grim smile on her face. "You'd best be careful, girl," the woman whispered, her voice suddenly sweet, like poison honey. "This town eats women like you for breakfast." Her smile widened. "And Colt Brannigan, well, he carries his own shadows. Some say they're darker than night itself. Some say he's the reason this town is called Dry Creek." The candle flame flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the woman's face. The door clicked shut, plunging Jessamine into darkness. Her mind reeled. The reason it was called Dry Creek? What did that even mean? Outside, the wind howled, and it sounded like a warning that the man protecting her might be more dangerous than the town she was hiding from. The whispers in town grew into a roar she couldn't escape. Every glance felt like an accusation. Every closed door felt like a judgment. So when Colt Brannigan showed up at the boarding house, his face set like stone, and said, "Best you come to the ranch. Out there, no one to judge." She didn't argue. Her pride screamed, but her fear screamed louder. The wagon ride was silent. The land opened up, swallowing the town behind them. Colt didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, protective, a shield. The ranch was plain, the house weathered by years of sun and storms. But it was strong, solid. It looked like him. He lifted her trunk and carried it inside to a small, clean room. "You'll rest here," he said, his voice rough. "No one will trouble you." He left her there, and the echo of his boots was the only sound. The days fell into a rhythm. She woke with the sun, helped where she could, mending his shirts, sweeping the floors, small things. She was trying to earn her keep, trying to quiet the voice in her head that called her a burden. He never said a word about it. But she saw him notice. a clean table, a patched sleeve. She'd catch him looking, just for a second, before his gray eyes would shift away. He worked from sunup to sundown, a solitary figure against the vast, empty sky. Sometimes she'd watch him from the porch, feeling a strange pull, something she didn't have a name for. His silence was a language she was starting to understand. It spoke of hard work, of solitude, of a deep, unshakable core. But the past was a ghost that wouldn't rest. She still waited for a telegram that never came. She told herself she was just passing through. But with every sunset, the roots she was putting down in this place grew a little deeper. One afternoon, a rider appeared, a plume of dust trailing behind him. Eli Rollins. His eyes raked over Jessamine, slick and ugly. "So it's true," he drawled, a cruel smirk on his face. "The mighty Colt Brannigan's keeping astray." He laughed, a sound like cracking wood. "How long till folks stop calling her a guest and start calling her something else?" Colt, who was mending a fence, went still. His hand froze on the post. The silence stretched, tight as a wire. Jessamine held her breath. "Best you ride on, Eli," Colt said, his voice low and dangerous. "This ain't your land." Eli's smirk widened. "Not my land, no, but the town's tongue is sharper than your wire. Careful, Brannigan. Shadows catch up to a man, especially a man with as many as you." He spat on the ground, turned his horse, and galloped away. Colt walked back to the porch, his face a mask. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw it. Not an apology, a promise, an unspoken vow that he would stand between her and the town's poison. That night, her hands trembled as she lit the lamp in her room. Eli's words echoed in her mind. Shadows catch up to a man. What shadows? What did he know? She started looking, not snooping, just noticing. The way he never spoke of his family, the way a certain sadness would settle in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. In a dusty corner of the parlor, tucked behind a stack of old almanacs, she found it. A small, carved wooden box. It wasn't locked. Her heart pounded as she lifted the lid. Inside, there was a photograph. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile holding a small child. And on the back, faded handwriting. Eliza and little Cole, forever. A cold wave washed over her. Eliza, his wife, and a son. Where were they? What happened to them? Suddenly, the silence of the ranch felt different. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was haunted. One evening, she found him on the porch, staring out at the blood-red sunset. She gathered her courage. "Your home is beautiful," she said softly. He didn't look at her. "It was," he said. Just 2 words, but they were filled with a world of pain. She wanted to ask about the photograph, about Eliza and Cole, but the wall around him was too high, too thick. He kept his secrets locked away tight. Later that week, a boy from town rode out with supplies. He also brought a letter. Not for her. For Colt. He took it, read it, and his face went pale. He crumpled the paper in his fist, his knuckles white. He didn't say what was in it. He just saddled his horse. "I have to go out," he said, his voice strained. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone." He rode off into the twilight, leaving her alone in the big, silent house. The photograph of the smiling woman and child seemed to mock her from its box. Fear, cold and sharp, crept into her heart. He was running from something. Or maybe he was running to something. Something connected to his past, to his shadows. The night deepened. The coyotes started their lonely calls. And then she heard it, a floorboard creaking in the hallway upstairs. But Colt was gone. She was supposed to be alone. Her blood ran cold. She wasn't alone in the house after all. The sound came again. A soft scrape from the room directly above her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum in the suffocating silence. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was in the house. Colt's words echoed in her mind. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone. She had locked them, she was sure of it. But that meant whoever was upstairs had been hiding, waiting. Waiting for Colt to leave. Waiting for her to be alone. She backed away from the parlor, her eyes wide, scanning the shadows. The lamp on the table cast long, dancing monsters on the walls. She grabbed the heaviest thing she could find, an iron poker from the fireplace. Her hand was slick with sweat. She crept towards the staircase, her breath held tight in her chest. Each step was a universe of terror. The house, which had felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The silence was no longer a comfort. It was a predator. She reached the top of the stairs and peered down the dark hallway. A sliver of light glowed from beneath the door to Colt's room. That's where they were. Her mind raced. Who could it be? Eli Rollins? Someone from the town? What did they want? The poker felt flimsy in her hand, a useless toy against the unknown. Then a man's voice, low and angry, drifted from the room. It's not here. He must have moved it. Another voice answered, this one thin and reedy. Check the floorboards. He was always clever about his hiding places. They weren't looking for money. They were looking for something specific, something Colt had hidden. Jessamine flattened herself against the wall, trying to control her ragged breathing. She had to get out. She had to run. But where? The endless prairie offered no cover. They would catch her in minutes. Her only chance was to hide. To wait. She slipped back down the stairs, her feet silent on the worn wood, and ducked into the dark pantry, pulling the door almost completely shut, leaving only a tiny crack to see through. Hours passed. The men upstairs tore the room apart. She heard the splintering of wood, the ripping of fabric. Finally, they came downstairs, their faces grim in the lamplight. It wasn't Eli. It was two strangers, their faces hard, their eyes cold. They looked like wolves. Nothing, the big one grumbled. The boss ain't gonna be happy. The other one scanned the downstairs room, his eyes lingering on the parlor where Jessamine had been sitting. Maybe the girl knows, he said. The one he's keeping. Jessamine's heart stopped. They knew about her. They were going to look for her. The big one shook his head. No time. He could be back any minute. Let's go. We'll get it from him another way. They left, melting back into the night as silently as they had come. Jessamine stayed hidden in the pantry for what felt like an eternity, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. When the sun finally started to bleed across the horizon, she heard the sound of a horse. Colt was back. She stumbled out of the pantry as he came through the door. His face was drawn and tired, but when he saw her and the terror in her eyes, his expression hardened. He saw the poker in her hand, then looked around the room. In 2 long strides, he was upstairs. He came back down a minute later, his jaw tight with a fury she had never seen before. What happened? He asked, his voice a low growl. She told him everything, the voices, the search, the threat against her. He listened without interrupting, his gray eyes burning. When she was finished, he didn't say it was going to be okay. He didn't offer empty comforts. He just walked to a large oak chest in the corner, a chest she had never seen him open. He unlocked it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a rifle and a Colt revolver. He checked the chambers, his movements practiced and deadly. They were looking for this, he said, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. He didn't show it to her. He just held it, his face grim. This is about more than land, Jessamine. It's about blood. Before she could ask what he meant, he looked at her, his expression softening for just a fraction of a second. The letter I got, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he was trying to hide. It was a warning, from an old friend. He said they were coming for me. That's where I went. To meet him, to find out why. He paused. It's because of him, The man you were supposed to meet in Willow Creek. Raymond. Jessamine stared at him, confused. What about Raymond? Colt looked her dead in the eye, and the words he spoke changed everything. He doesn't exist. It's a name they use, a lure for women traveling alone. Willow Creek isn't a town, Jessamine. It's a destination, the end of the line for girls they sell to mining camps and saloons. The world tilted on its axis. The letter in her pocket, the one she had held onto like a prayer, wasn't a promise. It was a trap, a lie designed to lead her into slavery. Getting off at Dry Creek Junction, it wasn't a mistake. It was a miracle. It had saved her life. The men who were here, Colt continued, his voice grim, they work for the man who runs the whole operation, a man named Silas Croft. And that ledger they were looking for, it has the names, dates, and payments. Everything needed to burn his empire to the ground. He looked from the ledger to her, and she finally understood. You've been hunting him, she whispered. Colt nodded. For years, ever since he took someone from me. He didn't have to say the name. Eliza. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more terrifying than she could have imagined. Colt wasn't just a rancher with a sad past. He was a man fighting a secret war, and by stepping off that train, she had walked right into the middle of it. The ranch was no longer a sanctuary, it was a fortress. And Jessamine was no longer a guest, she was a target. The knowledge that her whole journey had been a lie, a carefully constructed path to a horrific fate, left her numb. Willow Creek. Raymond. It was all a phantom limb, an ache for a life that was never real. Colt was different now. The quiet, watchful man was still there, but underneath, a hunter had emerged. He barely slept. He spent his hours cleaning his weapons, watching the horizon, his body coiled like a spring. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was the tense, breathless quiet before a battle. Why didn't you go to the law? She asked him one night, as he oiled his rifle by the firelight. He gave a short, bitter laugh. The law in these parts is either bought or buried. Silas Croft owns judges, sheriffs, you name it. That ledger is the only law that matters. It's the only thing he's afraid of. He looked at her, his gray eyes shadowed with old pain. He built his fortune on girls like you, Jessamine. Girls with no family, no one to come looking for them. He promised them a new life, a husband, a home, and he delivered them to hell. He paused, his knuckles white on the stock of the rifle. My wife, Eliza, she wasn't like you. She wasn't looking for a new life, she had one. Here, with me. He finally told her the story. Eli Rollins wasn't just a town bully, he was Eliza's brother. Their families had been neighbors for generations. Colt and Eliza had grown up together, fallen in love. But Eli was always jealous, always greedy. He fell in with Silas Croft, running errands, collecting debts. One day, Eliza overheard Eli and Croft talking about the trafficking ring. She was horrified. She threatened to expose them. A week later, she and their son, Cole, were riding in a wagon near the Dry Creek bed when a wheel mysteriously broke. The wagon overturned. They were killed. The sheriff ruled it an accident. But Colt knew. He knew it was Croft's men, on Eli's word. That's why the town whispered. They didn't know the truth, but they knew Colt Brannigan was a man defined by that tragedy. They called the place Dry Creek in hushed tones, a landmark of his grief. Eli had twisted the story, telling everyone Colt's recklessness had killed his own family, poisoning the town against him. This ledger, Colt said, tapping the leather-bound book, is my justice, my revenge. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and bleeding. He wasn't just protecting her from the town's judgment anymore. He was protecting her from the very evil that had destroyed his own life. His fight was now her fight. The next day, he brought the horses around. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll be back, and they'll bring more men. We need to get this ledger to the U.S. Marshals in Prescott." It was a 100-mile ride through hostile territory, land that Croft's men likely watched. It was a suicide mission. "You don't have to come," he told her. "I can take you to another town, put you on a train east." "No," she said, her voice clear and steady. The woman who had stepped off the train, scared and alone, was gone. In her place was someone who had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. "They tried to take my life. You saved it. This is my fight too." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, maybe more, passed through his eyes. He nodded once, a silent agreement. As they prepared to leave, packing what little they could, Jessamine noticed something odd. The faded photograph of Eliza and Cole was gone from its box. "Colt," she said, her heart sinking. "The picture." He turned, his face grim. "I know. It wasn't in the box this morning." A chilling realization dawned on her. The men who had searched the house. They hadn't just been looking for the ledger. They had taken the photograph. It was a message. "We know what you love, and we can take it all over again." The stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was personal. And it was a warning that Silas Croft would stop at nothing to bury his secrets, and them, forever. They rode out under the cover of a moonless night, two ghosts slipping away from a haunted ranch. The prairie, once a symbol of open space and freedom, now felt like a cage, vast and exposed. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like a whispered warning. Colt rode ahead, his body a dark silhouette against the stars, the rifle resting easy across his saddle. Jessamine followed, her own senses on fire. She was no longer a passenger in her own life. She was a soldier in a war she hadn't known existed. They rode for hours, the rhythm of the hooves a steady beat against the silence of the land. They avoided the main trails, sticking to dry washes and rocky outcrops. Colt moved with a certainty that told her he knew this land like the back of his hand, every hiding place, every secret path. At dawn, they took shelter in a small cave hidden behind a waterfall of rock. While Colt stood guard, Jessamine tended to the horses. She found herself watching him, the way he stood so still, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He was more than just a man with a grudge. He was a guardian, a silent protector forged in the fires of loss. He had built a wall of silence around his heart, but she could see the cracks. She could see the man underneath, the one who had loved a woman named Eliza and a boy named Cole. When he finally came to sit by the small, smokeless fire she'd built, the exhaustion was plain on his face. "You should get some rest," she said softly. He shook his head. "I can't." "You have to," she insisted. "You can't do this alone, Colt." She reached out, her hand resting on his arm. It was the first time she had touched him with deliberate tenderness. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, as if the touch was a foreign thing. But he didn't pull away. He looked at her, and for the first time, the wall around him crumbled completely. The grief, the rage, the years of lonely vengeance. It was all there in his eyes, raw and unguarded. "They took everything from me, Jessamine," he whispered, his voice cracking. "And now they're trying to take you. I won't let that happen." In that moment, he wasn't the giant the town feared. He was just a man who had lost his world and was terrified of losing what was left of it. "You won't," she said, her own voice thick with emotion. "We won't let that happen." That shared word, "we," hung in the air, a promise stronger than any vow. They were no longer a rancher and a stray. They were partners, a bond forged in fire and fear. They pushed on as soon as dusk fell. On the second day, they saw them. 3 riders, far in the distance, silhouetted against the setting sun. They weren't moving aimlessly. They were tracking them. Croft's men, Colt said, his voice grim. They know we're running. He led them into a narrow canyon, the walls of red rock rising up on either side. It was a dangerous move. It offered cover, but it was also a perfect place for an ambush. The air in the canyon was still and heavy. The sound of their horses' hooves echoed eerily off the stone walls. Suddenly, a rifle shot cracked the silence, the bullet whining off the rock just inches from Colt's head. Jessamine screamed as more shots rang out from the canyon rim above them. They were trapped. "Go!" Colt yelled, pushing her horse forward. "Ride! Don't stop!" He pulled his own rifle from its scabbard, reining his horse around to face their attackers. He was providing cover, making himself a target so she could escape. "I'm not leaving you!" she screamed back, turning her horse. "You have to!" he roared, his face a mask of desperation. "The ledger! You have to get the ledger to Prescott!" He had stuffed the leather-bound book into her saddlebag before they entered the canyon. He had known this might happen. He was sacrificing himself to see his mission through. Another bullet struck his horse. The animal screamed and went down, pinning Colt's leg beneath it. He cried out in pain, trying to pull himself free, as the riders above began to descend the rocky slope. Jessamine's mind went blank with terror. They were going to kill him, and it would be her fault. She looked at the saddlebag containing the ledger, then back at Colt, trapped and helpless. She had a choice to make: run for justice or stay for the man who had become her world. The riders were getting closer, their cruel laughter echoing in the canyon. She had only seconds to decide. Without a second thought, she wheeled her horse around and charged back towards Colt. The riders, surprised by her sudden attack, hesitated for a moment. It was all the time she needed. She reached into her own small travel bag and pulled out the only weapon she had, a hefty iron skillet she had packed for cooking. As one of the riders closed in, she swung the skillet with all her might, catching him square in the face. He toppled from his horse with a grunt, stunned. Adrenaline surged through her. She was no longer afraid. She was furious. Her bold move gave Colt the time he needed to wrench his leg free from under his fallen horse. He staggered to his feet, grabbed his rifle, and fired a shot at the second rider, who was taking aim at Jessamine. The man cried out and clutched his shoulder, dropping his gun. The third rider, seeing the tables had turned, cursed and spurred his horse, retreating back up the canyon. They were safe, for now. Colt leaned against a rock, breathing heavily, his leg clearly injured. He looked at Jessamine, who was still holding the skillet like a shield, her knuckles white. A slow smile, the first she had ever truly seen, spread across his face. "A skillet," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and amusement. "You saved me with a skillet." "I wasn't going to leave you," she said, her voice trembling now that the danger had passed. He pushed himself off the rock and limped towards her. He took the skillet from her hand, his fingers gently closing over hers. "I know," he said softly. The space between them disappeared. He looked down at her, his storm-gray eyes filled with an emotion that stole her breath. He had been ready to die for his mission, but she had been ready to die for him. That changed everything. But their moment was cut short. From the direction the third rider had fled, they heard a new sound. Not just one horse, many. Reinforcements. Croft himself was coming, and he was bringing an army. They were trapped in the canyon, with one good horse between them and a badly injured man. The mission, their lives, it all seemed hopeless. But then Colt looked up at the canyon walls, a strange, determined light in his eyes. "I know a way," he said. "It's dangerous, but it's our only chance." He pointed to a dark crevice in the rock face, barely visible in the shadows. "The old mining tunnels, no one's been in them for 50 years. It was a desperate gamble. The tunnels could be collapsed, a death trap. But as the sound of approaching horses grew louder, it was a gamble they had to take. The entrance to the mine was choked with weeds and loose rock, a dark mouth that seemed to swallow the light. It smelled of damp earth and forgotten things. Colt, leaning heavily on Jessamine, pushed aside a rotten wooden beam, and led them into the suffocating darkness. "Stay close," he breathed, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "These tunnels twist. It's easy to get lost." Using a small tinderbox, he managed to light a crude torch, its flickering flame pushing back the shadows just enough to see the narrow, treacherous path ahead. They moved slowly, Colt's injured leg making every step an agony. The air grew colder, thicker. The sound of their footsteps and ragged breaths was unnervingly loud. Water dripped from the ceiling, a relentless rhythmic beat like a slow-ticking clock. They were in a maze of rock and darkness, the world outside completely gone. "How do you know these tunnels?" Jessamine whispered, her voice tight with fear. "My father used to prospect here when he was a boy," Colt replied, his voice strained. "He told me stories, said they connect all the way to the old Miller's Peak." Miller's Peak was on the other side of the ridge, miles away. If they could make it, they could bypass Croft's men completely. But it was a huge if. After what felt like hours, they came to a fork in the tunnel. Colt hesitated, trying to remember the stories his father had told him. He chose the path to the left. They walked on, the silence pressing in on them. Then, they heard it, a low rumbling from behind them. "They're following us," Colt growled. "They must have known about this entrance." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Jessamine. There was nowhere to run. They were trapped in the guts of the earth with their hunters closing in. The rumbling grew louder, closer. It wasn't just footsteps, it was something else. "It's not them," Colt said, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "It's a collapse." The tunnel behind them was caving in. The riders must have triggered it, or perhaps used dynamite. A deafening roar filled the air as tons of rock and earth thundered down, sealing the path they had just taken. They were plunged into absolute, pitch-black silence, the torch having been extinguished by the blast of air. They were cut off, trapped, buried alive. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. The darkness was total, a physical weight pressing on her eyes. She couldn't see Colt, couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. "Colt?" she cried out, her voice a thin, reedy thing. "I'm here," his voice came back, calm and steady in the blackness. A moment later, she felt his hand find hers, his grip strong and reassuring. "Don't be afraid." The rumble had stopped, replaced by an unnerving silence. They were alive, but their situation was dire. They were trapped underground, with a finite amount of air, one torch, and no idea if the path ahead was even open. Colt managed to relight the torch, its flame seeming pitifully small against the immense darkness. The air was thick with dust. "The way back is gone," he stated the obvious, his voice grim. "We have to go forward. It's the only way." They pressed on, their hope a tiny flicker like the torch flame. The tunnel grew narrower, the walls closing in. At one point they had to crawl on their hands and knees through a tight passage, the rock scraping their backs. Colt's leg was a constant, agonizing problem, but he never complained. He just gritted his teeth and kept moving, his determination a force of nature. After what felt like days, when their thirst was a fire in their throats and their hope was all but extinguished, they saw it. A faint glimmer of light ahead. Not the torch. A different light. Daylight. They scrambled forward, their hearts pounding with a wild, desperate hope. The light grew stronger, and they could feel a faint breeze, smell the clean scent of pine. The tunnel opened up into a small cavern, and there, high above them, was a hole in the ceiling, a circle of brilliant blue sky. It was an old ventilation shaft. They had made it. They were out. They emerged from the darkness, blinking in the bright sunlight, like two creatures born anew. They were on the far side of the ridge, the canyon and Croft's men miles behind them. They were battered, exhausted, but they were alive. And Jessamine still had the ledger. As they rested, Colt tended to his leg. which was badly swollen. Jessamine looked at him, at his face streaked with dirt and sweat, at the lines of pain etched around his eyes. She looked at the vast, open sky, the endless plains stretching out before them. They had been through hell together. They had been buried and reborn. The silence between them was no longer about unspoken feelings. It was a deep, shared understanding, a connection that words couldn't touch. "We're going to make it, Colt," she said, her voice filled with a certainty she hadn't felt before. "We're going to see this through." He looked at her, and the raw gratitude in his eyes was more powerful than any declaration of love. He reached out and brushed a stray piece of hair from her face, his calloused thumb gentle against her cheek. "I know," he said. And in that moment, she knew that her journey hadn't ended in Dry Creek. It had begun there. Their journey to Prescott was a blur of exhaustion and grim determination. They traveled on foot, Colt's limp slowing them down, but his will never faltering. They survived on what little they could find, their shared hardship forging their bond into something unbreakable. The silence between them was now comfortable, filled with unspoken trust. They were a team. When they finally saw the lights of Prescott in the distance, a wave of relief so powerful it was dizzying washed over Jessamine. They had made it. They had beaten the odds. They found the U.S. Marshal's office, a small, unassuming building on the main street. The Marshal, a man with a weathered face and weary eyes, listened to their story with skepticism. But when Colt placed the leather-bound ledger on his desk, the man's expression changed. He opened it, his eyes scanning the neat columns of names, dates, and figures. His skepticism turned to shock, then to cold fury. "I've been hearing rumors about Croft for years," the Marshal said, his voice a low growl. "But I never had proof. This changes everything." He deputized a dozen men on the spot. A posse was formed not just to arrest Silas Croft and his men, but to dismantle his entire operation, to liberate the women he held captive. But Colt wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice hard. "Eli Rollins, in Dry Creek. He was part of it. He's the one who led them to my wife." The Marshal nodded grimly. "He'll face justice, too." Justice. The word finally felt real. As the posse prepared to ride out, the Marshal turned to Jessamine. "You're a brave woman, miss. The testimony you can provide will be invaluable." For the first time, Jessamine didn't feel like a stray or a victim. She felt strong. She had a voice, and she was going to use it. The ride back to Dry Creek was different. This time they rode with the law at their backs. They arrived at dawn, the small town still sleepy and quiet. But the quiet was soon broken. The Marshals moved with swift, brutal efficiency. They hit Croft's safe house, arresting his men. They stormed the saloon, freeing several terrified young women who had been locked in the back rooms. And a small group, led by Colt and the Marshal, rode out to Eli Rollins's farm. Eli came out onto his porch, his face a mask of arrogant surprise that quickly curdled into fear when he saw the badges. "What is this?" he blustered. "You have no right." "It's over, Eli," Colt said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Eli's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. He saw Jessamine standing beside Colt, her face set and resolute, his face twisted with hate. "You," he spat. "This is because of you. You." He never finished the sentence. With a sudden move, he lunged back into his house, emerging a second later with a shotgun. He aimed it directly at Jessamine. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The glint of the sun on the gun barrel, Eli's snarling face, Jessamine's sharp intake of breath. But Colt was faster. He threw himself in front of her, shielding her with his body, a human wall against the coming blast. The shotgun roared. The force of the blast threw Colt back into her, and they both fell to the ground. Jessamine's ears were ringing. She felt a warm wetness spreading across her side. For a terrifying second, she thought she'd been hit. But it wasn't her blood. It was Colt's. He had taken the full force of the blast in his shoulder and back. He lay still, his eyes closed, his face pale beneath the grime. "Colt!" she screamed, a raw, ragged sound of pure terror. The marshals returned fire, and Eli went down in a hail of bullets. But Jessamine didn't see it. She only saw Colt, bleeding, unmoving, in the dust. The justice she had fought for had come at the ultimate price. The world went silent. The gun smoke cleared, and the only sound was Jessamine's own ragged breathing as she knelt beside Colt. His blood was on her hands, dark and terrifying. "No," she whispered, shaking his still form. "No, Colt, please." The marshal rushed over, his face grim. He checked Colt's pulse, then his breathing. "He's alive," he said, the words cutting through her panic. "But it's bad. We need to get him to a doctor now." They carried him back to town, to the small clinic run by the town's only doctor. Jessamine never left his side. She sat in a chair by his bed for days, watching his chest rise and fall, praying with an intensity she didn't know she possessed. The town was in an uproar. The truth about Silas Croft, about Eli Rollins, about the so-called stray woman, had come out. The whispers turned from judgment to awe, then to shame. Miss Carroway avoided her gaze. The men who had taunted her now tipped their hats in respect. Even little Ruthie May came by, leaving another small bouquet of wildflowers on the clinic's doorstep. But none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the man lying broken in the bed. On the third day, he woke up. His gray eyes fluttered open and found her immediately. He tried to speak, but only a dry rasp came out. She gave him a sip of water, her hand trembling. "Jessamine," he whispered, his voice weak. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not going anywhere." A faint smile touched his lips. He reached up, his hand shaking, and touched her cheek. "Good," he whispered, before drifting back to sleep. The road to recovery was long and slow, but he was strong, and he wasn't alone. Jessamine was there every day, changing his bandages, reading to him, talking to him about the future, about rebuilding the barn, about rebuilding their lives. The news came that Silas Croft's entire network had been shattered, thanks to the Ledger. Dozens of men were arrested, and more importantly, dozens of women were freed. The letter that had led her to Dry Creek, the symbol of her shame, had become the key to their salvation. Months later, Colt was finally strong enough to return to the ranch. It was different now. The charred remains of the barn were gone, replaced by a fresh pile of lumber. The people of Dry Creek, in a silent act of apology and respect, had donated the materials to help him rebuild. As they stood on the porch, looking out at the land, Colt turned to her. His arm, still in a sling, was a reminder of everything they had been through. "This place, it was just a house full of ghosts," he said, his voice quiet but strong. "You brought it back to life, Jessamine." "We brought it back to life," she corrected him softly. He took her hand, his grip firm. "Jessamine McGraw," he said, his gray eyes searching hers. "You came here by mistake. You were meant for a man named Raymond in a town called Willow Creek." He paused, a slow, real smile spreading across his face. "But what if the biggest mistake of your life was actually your destiny?" She didn't need to answer. He could see it in her eyes. The lonely, lost woman who had stepped off that train was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and her home. She hadn't found the life she was promised in a letter. She had found something better, something real, a love forged in fire, tested in darkness, and sealed in the quiet, steady heart of a man named Colt Brannigan. Wrong station, wrong town, right life. If you enjoyed this story and you want to hear more tales of unexpected turns and hidden truths, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You never know what you'll find when you take the wrong turn.